Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we will cover what roles training and nutrition play in body composition outcomes. First, let's quickly cover what exactly we mean when referring to body composition. Body composition is exactly what the name implies. It refers to what our body is composed of. The human body is composed of many different tissues. However, for lifting enthusiasts, we are primarily concerned with two main tissues. These are muscle mass and body fat. This is because manipulating these tissues can improve our visual appearance, as well as improving athletic performance and improving general health. So the long-term goal for most trainees is to increase muscle mass and decrease body fat. To achieve these body composition goals, we need to manipulate our training and nutrition protocols. The nutrition side of the equation is very easy to define. It simply refers to what we eat in a given day. The training side of the equation, on the other hand, is a little bit more complex. To make this as simple and easy to understand, we can break training into two distinct categories. These are resistance training and general physical activity. Resistance training refers to any form of weight training aimed at providing a hypertrophic stimulus. General physical activity refers to any other form of exercise or movement, including cardio, sport practice, walking, cycling, etc. Although all these general training methods are actually all quite different, their role in body composition changes are all very similar, as we will discuss later in this video. Let's now discuss what impact these variables have on body composition changes. As we discussed, we can split training into two separate categories, so we will discuss each one individually. First, let's cover what role resistance training plays in body composition changes. There are two primary roles that resistance training has on body composition. Let's now cover each of these factors individually. The first and main role that resistance training plays in body composition changes is for muscle growth. Resistance training can be thought of as the stimulus for muscle growth. This is what triggers the body to build muscle tissue as an adaptation. Without getting into the details of how we can train to maximize muscle growth, assuming we provide an adequate stimulus, we will cause some disruption to homeostasis. This basically means that our normal balanced state of being was interfered or damaged, and needs to be repaired. Our body always seeks a balanced, healthy state, which is what we refer to as homeostasis. So as a result of this disruption, the body adapts. However, rather than simply returning back to baseline, the body will supercompensate, meaning that it will recover beyond its original level. It is theorized that this is a result of the body seeing the stimulus as a threat. Therefore, it must adapt to a greater level to prevent such an event from disrupting homeostasis again. This is why we need to continue making training harder over time to see continual adaptations over the long term. Another indirect role that resistance training plays in body composition development is for energy expenditure. Resistance training itself doesn't directly expend a significant amount of energy throughout the day. Usually we would only train for around 1 hour, most of which is spent resting between sets. There are much more efficient ways to expend energy if we wanted to. However, resistance training can indirectly increase energy expenditure over the long term. This is a result of increases in muscle mass over time. Because resistance training promotes muscle growth, increases in muscle mass over time will increase our basal metabolic rate. This research review gathered data from over 6,400 subjects across a range of different populations. The researchers found that fat-free mass was the most accurate predictor of energy expenditure across a range of different populations. As we can see in this graph, there was a clear relationship between fat-free mass and total daily energy expenditure. The more fat-free mass subjects had, generally the greater their total daily energy expenditure was, regardless of gender and age. This is probably because skeletal muscle seems to be more energetically expensive than other tissues like fat mass. So what this suggests is that resistance training can promote muscle growth, which will increase basal metabolic rate, which is the energy we expend just to function and stay alive. Because metabolic rate contributes the greatest total amount to overall energy expenditure, long-term resistance training is likely to increase how many calories we burn per day. This can indirectly help us to reduce body fat by improving our adherence to a calorie deficit. Next, let's discuss what role general physical activity plays in body composition changes. General physical activity also plays two primary roles in body composition changes, which we will now cover. The main role of general physical activity is to increase daily energy expenditure. On top of basal metabolic rate, movement and exercise can additionally increase the total amount of energy we expend per day. Most forms of general physical activity aren't really going to promote significant muscle growth, so they are more methods of increasing short-term energy expenditure. This is why earlier in the video, we grouped all forms of general physical activity together, because they all have the same effect on body composition outcomes. So it doesn't really matter what exact method of physical activity we implement, the goal is simply to increase energy expenditure. We could do this by walking, running, cycling, gardening, cleaning, or any other form of exercise. Increasing our energy expenditure can then help us to adhere to a calorie deficit or maintenance, helping us to promote fat loss. Another role that general physical activity plays in body composition outcomes is due to its effect on hunger and satiety. When individuals perform moderate to high general physical activity levels throughout the day, we usually see a greater sensitivity to food intake. This means it helps us be more satiated and less hungry after eating. This study explored the effects of habitual physical activity levels on the response to food intake. It was found that individuals with low daily physical activity levels experienced lower satiety levels from food intake compared with those who had a moderate or high physical activity level. This suggests that being generally more active seems to improve appetite control and regulation. This means we are more likely to eat in accordance with our hunger signals and feel more satiated after a meal. Once again, this is an indirect effect that can allow trainees to better adhere to a calorie deficit or maintenance calories. And as a result, this can promote fat loss. Next, let's talk about how nutrition influences body composition. Once again, there are two primary roles that nutrition plays in body composition changes. Let's now cover what these are. Nutrition is where we intake our energy from. Without energy, we will have no raw material to fuel movement and exercise, or to fuel any bodily functions for that matter. Each day, we consume energy and we expend energy, which is generally measured as calories. This is the basic law of thermodynamics, calories in versus calories out. As we know, if we eat more calories than we expend, we will gain weight. If we eat equal calories to what we expend, we will maintain weight. And if we eat less calories than we expend, we will lose weight. So basically, the main role of nutrition for body composition is to control our energy intake. While energy expenditure is determined by many other factors, energy intake is purely controlled via how much food and drink we consume. Therefore, if our goal is to reduce body fat, this will require us to be in a calorie deficit for an extended period of time for significant fat loss to occur. While we can increase energy expenditure through exercise, it is a much less efficient process than reducing calorie intake. So if general physical activity levels are already quite high, then trainees are best off limiting calorie intake to achieve a calorie deficit. The other secondary role that nutrition can have for body composition is to assist muscle growth. As we mentioned, nutrition is not the stimulus for muscle growth, resistance training is. So while nutritional interventions won't cause muscle growth, they can assist hypertrophy adaptations. Nutrition can be manipulated in a way to maximize the muscle growth response that was initiated with resistance training. Manipulating nutrition to maximize muscle growth is a whole topic in itself, so we won't go into all the details. However, there are two main nutritional factors which can contribute to greater long-term muscle growth. The first is to actually be in a calorie surplus, in other words, eating more than you expend to gain weight over time. This seems counterintuitive to the topic of this video, which is to reduce body fat, not to gain fat. While eating in a surplus will inevitably result in some fat gain, it will also provide a more anabolic environment to build muscle mass. Assuming that we are providing a good hypertrophic stimulus through resistance training, the muscle growth response will be greater by eating in a surplus compared with a deficit or maintenance calories. This doesn't mean that you can't build muscle in a deficit or at maintenance, it just means that you will likely see a faster rate of muscle growth in a surplus. Obviously, there is a trade-off here. If we are in a surplus, we will also gain body fat, which is counter to our overall body composition goals. However, trainees may want to go through intentional surplus phases to maximize muscle growth at certain times. Then, separate phases of cutting can be implemented to reduce body fat while preserving the new muscle mass that has been built. There is no right or wrong way to either structure a phasic approach or to only focus on maintaining a leaner physique. It should just be understood that a surplus is probably required to absolutely maximize muscle growth in the long term. And the other main nutritional consideration for muscle growth is protein intake. Once again, protein is not a stimulus for muscle growth, but it can certainly assist the muscle growth response. Generally, higher daily protein intakes are going to promote greater muscle growth when ingested in conjunction with resistance training. This meta-analysis compiled data from over 100 studies exploring the effects of daily protein intake on muscle growth. As we can see in this graph, it was found that higher protein intakes generally resulted in favorable muscle growth outcomes. However, we can also see here that there were diminishing returns as protein intake increased. So consuming more than around 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram per day was not all that additionally beneficial. This suggests that high protein intakes are certainly favorable for muscle growth, although excessively high intakes may not be as additionally hypertrophic. Nonetheless, consuming a high daily protein intake seems to assist muscle growth induced by resistance training. This can allow trainees to grow muscle mass at a slightly faster rate compared with consuming a lower protein intake. So to summarize this video, let's go through a brief overview of what we have discussed. Essentially, both nutrition and training are important factors for achieving our body composition goals. However, each variable plays different roles in the process with some overlap between them. The primary role of resistance training is to provide the stimulus for muscle growth and can also assist with fat loss in the long term by increasing long-term basal metabolic rate. General physical activity, on the other hand, has the primary role of increasing daily energy expenditure and can also help to regulate our hunger and satiety signals. Both roles can assist trainees in adhering to a lower calorie balance. And nutrition has the primary role of regulating energy intake, which is a major factor in controlling energy balance. Furthermore, we can specifically manipulate nutrition in a way that maximizes the hypertrophic response to resistance training. Phases of being in a calorie surplus and consuming a high total daily protein intake are both going to help trainees maximize muscle growth. So ultimately, both training and nutrition are important considerations for improving body composition, although their roles in this process are quite different. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Check out flowhighperformance.com for online coaching, training templates, ebooks, and more.